So let me tell you what I used to do all the time, no matter where I went, right? Especially if I was going to be there for any extended period of time. I still do this some, but if I'm perfectly honest with you, it's a lot harder to do it today than it was years ago, right? Mainly because of the conditions of the people and people not willing to work together, right? That provides, it actually hurts incentive, right? And it actually has an impact on creativity and even a willingness to do it, much less actually doing it. So I bring those things out. Let me just, here, I'll tell you. So I drive around. As I drove around, I'd imagine what could be there. I'd look at how things were designed, right? I'd observe people, right? What's working, what's not working. How could it be made better, right? I'd look at, what could make this a more inspiring place, How can we do things in a way that give people more opportunities, right? How can we do things in a way that tell a story, that edifies, that builds up, right? That encourages, right? That sparks creativity, right? And brings people together, right? So it doesn't matter where I'm at, any city I've lived in or town, I've developed a plan for each one of those places based upon doing exactly that, studying the area, right? Knowing what the people, the culture, right? The history, right? Looking at the needs, right? The problems. That's how I'm designed. And almost my entire life, everybody's told me, you think too big or you think too much. And I look at your country and I go, well, you don't think enough and you think too small. So let's, I want you to just humor me, right? Take a drive in the town that you live in, right? Or a walk and look at how things are built. Look at what works, what doesn't work, what could be there. I want you to dream. I want you to think about what could be, right? And think about what might inspire people, create a better environment, right? What are ways that you could build into your ideas, ways to encourage, to inspire, and to educate, right? I mean, that's how we used to think. That's why our history, wherever you go, they're historical markers, right? They tell a story, like right here where I live. It's a historical place, right? And it tells a story, right? That's why I put that series of talks together about history as a book of books, and all of us being a storybook, individually and collectively. And I do that to try to make the point to you that you're in a great meta-narrative, right? You play a vital role. No matter how small you may think your role is, it's actually impactful all the way in a cascading way and a ripple effect to the totality of the whole, right? So what you think about things is important. How you interact with others is important, right? How you use your giftings, your talents, your skills is important. And when you have a top-down structure that tells you, that they know better than everybody, right? And they ignore everybody else. Well, I totally understand how it feels like that you don't, but you still actually are having an impact. They just are trying to co-opt it, but they're the ones that are actually delusional. So look at what is there. How can you make it more interesting, right? How can you create an environment that tells a story that lifts people up, right? Everybody, right? Because everything here tells a story, right? The world I imagined, if I were to build a city, right? Everything in it would be there for a reason, and it would tell a story. It'd be a story of stories, right? That's kind of what a theme park is too, like Disney, for example, right? But what I'm talking about is an awareness that you are in a story-rich environment. We are designed for stories, right? Because each of us are a story. And this is one of the areas where corporate America lost its way by not engaging people at the storybook level of their own lives where they are. All right, this is the problem with media in a way, is that it's lost its way, right? We used to do these things, called World's Fairs, right? And it would inspire people. It inspired a lot of people, right? But we siloed that off to trade shows, right? So it's industry specific. We have put ourselves in more damn boxes while failing to inspire other people, other generations, and the older generations to get involved because they have great ideas. They remember how it was, right? We've thrown all that away, right? We've essentially demolished our inheritance here because of stupidity, lack of vision, and moral and ethical corruption. It's true. So our stories are turning into tragedies or a book of comedy of errors, right? So what I want you to do is I want you to think beyond that. What can be? How can we take some things that are still going on or things from the past that used to work, reapply them now in a different way, right? To inspire, to encourage, to educate, to build up, right? And to mobilize, think about county fairs. They're still doing county fairs. How can those be reimagined to do more than what they're doing right now, right? To inspire people to get involved in a bigger way, to change things, right? For the better for everybody. And I'm not talking about politics. I can't stand politics, right? Politics is destroying this country. Just telling you that too. Politics does not inspire people. Politicians don't inspire people. Statesmen inspire people because statesmen are more than politicians. They're visionaries. They're servant leaders, right? They inspire people to greater things, right? And they have an understanding of themselves and of human nature and others and the society that allows them to do those things, to step up to the plate and be that. We don't have that. The system is geared against that. Because of those people, statesmen, are generally mavericks, right? So you have to have those kinds of people if you're going to change that paradigm. And I don't mean just in the government. I mean public, private sector, right? All the way down to the local levels, right? That's how you change things, right? Everything is fear. Everything is dystopian right now. I put a lot of that on social media and a lack of thinking through things on the front end or simply not caring. I think we know a lot of people knew what was going to happen with it already, right? Yeah? It's not like we didn't have the science, right? So all of these things are important when you talk about how to harden your society against hostile influences and focus them and empower them by inspiring them, right, to play a role in something they're already playing a role in. Not only their own lives, but the broader society and their communities, right? And that's all generations, right? Everybody has something to bring to the table. Everybody has concepts, ideas, knowledge, skills, talents, giftings, right? We have failed to mobilize that well, right? That's something we've got to change, because as it is for people, so too it is for the nation. You know what the big problem is here? The big problem here is that You've traded childlikeness for childishness. That happens when you jettison truth, love, right? Justice and mercy, and a humble and contrite heart. And when you replace it with counterfeits, right? You see, to be able to truly change society for good, you have to be childlike. If you look at all the ideologies and concepts and worldviews out there that deny that, right? They actually hate that, and a lot of them are working in our society right now. Well, they despise childlikeness. They also despise childhood and children. There's a reason for that, and it's for the very reasons I'm telling you these things right now, right? They've executed their childlikeness, right? And become childish, right? Selfish, right? Corrupted. So it takes childlike wonder to learn. Real creativity, right? And a childlike wonderment is what created all the things, right, that you use to actually destroy it now. Your greatest impact on the world was your childlikeness. You may not realize that because we're so busy hating everything that we are and have done, whether we did it or not, and whether it's correct or accurate. But your greatest cultural contribution to the world in many ways was entertainment and story. And look at Disney. You hate Disney because it's childlike. That's why you've corrupted it. You've got people trying to corrupt it even more, right? Because they're childish. That's an example of what I mean of the virus that's actually really at work in your society. Right? You created, this country painted a portrait of what could be and was an example, even in its imperfections, of what might be, could be, if people actually got along, treated one another with love and respect, right? And kept their childlikeness. I mean, it's still echoing around the world. That's why people still want to come here. It's not just money. It's not just opportunity. You're actually better at making money, right? And influencing others when you're childlike. The very things that you now despise and think are foolish are actually your greatest strengths, which means you're weakening yourselves. So, again, it goes back to story. What kind of story are you going to write individually, and are we going to write collectively as a nation? Because right now, it's one of dystopia. It's a dystopian story. And if you stay on that, that's not going to inspire anybody, and it's only going to lead to more problems because there's no hope in that, right? That's why you see such narcissism in our society, right? Such nihilism in our society. A lack of care for anybody but anybody else. A lack of respect, a willingness to listen and learn from others, find common ground, right? That takes childlikeness, and childlikeness also takes humility. The older you get, right? Because if you're not humble, you can't learn, and if you're not willing to learn, well, you become rigid and stale, and ultimately, it's like a slow death, right? And your creativity dies. That's what's been being barraged and destroyed here. And one of the greatest impacts on crushing that has been the flood of pharmakia, the flood of drugs and addiction in this country, which your leadership and your policies, right, have allowed. Right? That's a self-inflicted wound. So everything has gotten backwards, right? You have to have money to make money, right? So it's all about the money, right? I mean, I know some of you don't like Walt Disney, but you should read his story, right? Money was secondary, right? The creativity and the storytelling, right? Creating an environment of hope and teaching people things, right? And bringing people together was what drove him, not the bottom line. But see, over time, everything has become about that here. And it became more about that because you're trying to replace something that is an intangible, right? That is an existential reality, that's a spiritual reality, that's an eternal reality with temporal stuff. That'll never work. Right? That's why you have so many oligarchs around the world. More is never enough, right? They will never be satisfied. They will destabilize and continue to destabilize things, right? Because they cannot find any satisfaction with anything that they already have because, well, they've lost their childlikeness, right? It's all about them. It's all about wealth, power, right? Influence and control, right? Well, every coup, every war, right? Every revolution, every autocratic society, every dystopian story includes those elements, right? That's what you become and are becoming. And no one wants that other than a very precious few who are not all that precious in how they view the world. Because they view the world in fear, right? And confusion, and in arrogance and pride. It's all about them. Their entire lives are trying to avoid dying. Let's take the transhumanists. There's a reason why so many oligarchs, so many billionaires, right? So many of the wealthy and famous are obsessed with living forever, right? In temporal form, right? They're willing to devour the entire world to survive, to do it. Even though it's a self-negating worldview, right? I'll post something after this that talks about that in greater detail, right? One of my writings. So, if you're living in the abject poverty, cognitively, of fear and confusion, and you're terrified of death, you can't really live. In a sense, you're already dead. If nothing else, spiritually and creatively. I mean, the world that can be is what drives people, right? With hope. But the hope has to be actualized in a real way. And it has to be based on real things. Because everything here points to something everybody longs for, and that is a world without suffering, without pain, right? But this world is not going to be that. This world, right, is fading away. The world to come won't have the things in it that creates the conditions that this one does. But it's still important for this world to have examples of what that can be, what that might be, and to look for, right? Because hope, right? Real hope is childlike, right? Real creativity is childlike. And when you have real truth and real love, those other things blossom. And that's precisely what we don't have going on right now in this world. Right? And I've talked ad infinitum about why the world is the way it is. And I started out many, many years ago talking about how the world can become different. Not perfect, but better. But you see, here in these bodies, in these temporal forms, for whatever reason, and I've explained this too in other talks, everybody's wired for the negative. It's easier to be negative here, right, than it is to be positive. Right? It's easier to be caught in that negative trap. Right? It's easier to be stuck in that negative loop of fear and see the world dystopian now than it is to see it with any hope. And so if you're living in a dystopian frame of reference and it's constantly being put on you as the society is morally and ethically degenerating and people are against one another and nothing's getting done to fix problems and everybody's blaming one another and everybody's, being lured off into some sort of addiction or some sort of, identity trap or whatever, right? That has an impact on how the entire society can function in any other areas. It's especially creativity. And that right there is the key that we're going to have to dive into a little more. And as I'm doing that, I'm going to give you examples of what we can do, give you some examples out of my own life of how I view things and some of the things I've come up with as I look at these things. One of the things that the lockdowns, COVID-19 created wasn't just the fear, the uncertainty, the confusion, the division. It created a loss of hope, right? And a loss of connection to other people, right? I know how it affected me. It impacted me. And, by the time after 11 months of lockdown where I was at, and I was in the middle of nowhere, 11 months, right? Completely solo, 26 miles to the nearest town. I mean, by the time I got back to Richmond, I was like an animal. And my body's still recovering from things, right? How much of it was COVID and other circumstances that about how I got it, or the long duration social isolation, it's hard to tell, right? Because all these things have aggregate impacts, right? So I would go and sit in the middle of this little town, almost 30 miles away in this town, and just hopefully interact just to see people, right? Hoping that somebody would actually sit down and have a conversation with me about anything. I did a lot of talks during that time period, including some very important ones that I think pulled the veil back on a lot of things. But the reality of it is even though I was prepared to be able to do long duration, isolation, as difficult as that is, I reached a point where the impacts on it impacted, well, it basically, it shut down a lot of creativity. There was a cognitive and biochemical impact, as well as cascade effects physiologically and how I deal with others, right? So when I first got back here, being like an animal, I didn't know how to deal with all the people and the noise and all. It was like torture, I've had to have an adjustment period, yeah, because my stress tolerances were blown out, right? And a lot of the things that I've always used to cope, right, I've been able, started degrading after a period of time. And that was my creativity. That was my childlikeness, right? And my ability to be able to take times where you take those kinds of times and be able to mold it into a hopeful set of solutions and a perspective for a better tomorrow, right? And I'm not alone in that. Everybody in the world, they were all impacted by that and are still being impacted by it, right? Because fear, right, uncertainty, confusion, social isolation, right, a lack of leadership that is encouraging, that's presenting a future, right, beyond the crisis, that's more hopeful, that we all could be a part of. The lack of that and the lack of a vision for the country so that people could channel those energies in that time towards that. Well, not having that exponentially increased the damage, right? It increased the severity of the impacts of the crisis. And that whole time, right, up until right now, I've been saying that, and even before that, that we've got to actually start inspiring people, encouraging people, not dividing people, not turning them against one another, right? But coming together. What can we do together, right? Right? Individually and collectively, not one or the other, both, to build a better country, to solve our problems, to help one another, and to create an environment where everybody, right, has opportunities to do all kinds of things, right, that's meaningful, and also, vocations that, pay them a fair wage, right, so they can live, right? But the disreality that set in those disconnections broke the country. It broke the world. And you're seeing just the beginning part of all that beginning to come out. Ukraine, Russia, all of that. The wars, the violence, and the stupefaction of leadership to continue putting downward pressures on these people by lording over them. They're only increasing the severity of and complexity of governance, right? Because they're co-opted, right? In a sense, they're like Eve, who took the fruit in the garden, right? So it was offered to them, and they bought it. They bought in, right? So what I was telling you then, I'm telling you now, is that we have to actually talk again, right? We have to actually interact again, right? We have to push the political programming, the fear, the confusion. We have to step through that together. And we have to find common ground, right? To get to know one another again, right? And that sense of community and people leading that by being servant leaders and examples of that is so very important, right? Not only in the midst of a crisis, but as you are navigating through that crisis and coming out on the other side, right? So if we're going to come through this stronger, right, there are a lot of changes that have to occur. And quite frankly, the government's not going to be able to do it. Corporations aren't going to be able to do it. We are going to have to do it individually. Hear that siren? It's an emergency, right? People are in a constant state of emergency. Still. Right? There is a collective post-traumatic stress disorder going on. Regardless of which side of the political, spectrum you may be on, everybody is experiencing that together. That's what's being exploited, right? What's being exploited, right, is the political, the economic, financial, the ideological, right, the ethnocentric, identity cards. Right? All of those are false constructs meant to keep people divided, to keep them in conflict, and to keep everybody at each other's throats. While the people that are profiting on it, and actually are the most enslaved to the very things, are using it to gain more wealth, power, influence, and control. That's not going to change the paradigm. What's going to change the paradigm is people being willing to step through that, walk through that, overcome that together, right? And rediscover childlikeness, rediscover hope. And that hope, the greatest hope, right, is the hope that dawns from the inside out. It's transformative hope. It's a spiritual renewal, right? In Christendom, we talk about, it's a rebirth, right? It's a spiritual birth of light, truth, and love from the inside out that also transforms, right, and renews your mind and gives you broader vision to see things, right, and to see others in love and grace, and to live just and merciful lives, right, that dispense that freely, right, that looks out for the good of others, right? Love your neighbors, you love yourself, right? That's the kind of servant leadership we need also. We need people to model that, right? Right now, both sides of the political spectrum are terrified of one another. And again, they're both playing roles in a story that is inherently being written that is not good for either side. Now, without getting into the details, right, of who's right and who's wrong on things, both sides have things that are very wrong, and both sides have things that are very right. The problem is the mixture on both sides, right? And so that's got to be dealt with. And that can only happen when there's a true middle for people to come to. And that is everything that our systems and our enemies, right, spiritually and in this world, are working against, intentionally or unintentionally. And then getting others to work as proxies, unbeknownst to them, by triggering them on both sides, right, to play a role in their own self-destruction, working against their own best interests. So, what do you think it would look like if that were to change? Huh? I mean, if you really want to get back to some level of real normalcy and an opportunity to at least have joy and happiness here to some degree, and not be chained to fear and confusion and rage and paranoia, what do you think it would look like? What do you think it would look like if you were to rediscover being childlike? You know? What would that look like for you? when you weren't worried about everything, you weren't always walking in fear, when you dreamed again, you were creative, you were interested in learning about all kinds of things, and you were, not strapped to the paranoia and fear so much that you're so risk averse that you're afraid to walk outside your own doors. When you like to talk to other people that were different, right? And you like to actually learn new things. See, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about that we have to reestablish in order to overcome not only the crisis we've come through, but the crisis that we're in and the ones that are to come. Right? We have to heal up from that stuff individually and collectively as a nation. Now, can you honestly tell me that the way our system is functioning right now, it's doing that? Can you honestly tell me that the political parties are achieving that, or at least providing an opportunity for that? They're not. So if you're putting all your hope in one political party or the other, I got news for you. You're going to be disappointed yet again. You're going to be disappointed because the only ones that can truly change things here for the better is us. So, what does a vision for the country look like? Right? And I'm going to preface this by saying, anytime that people have ideas at that scale, right, there's got to be a way to put things together that makes it possible. And some things are not going to be possible or not be able to happen as the way that people want them, right? That's part of having a common middle ground, is also finding places of compromise where you realize you may not get everything that you want, but you might get a lot of it. But as it is right now, you're going to get none of it, right? So some is better than none, and some can also lead to more, right? But none only leads to more none. In fact, you'll lose what you already have too. You see what I mean? That's what I mean when I use the term dissipation. Right? We need to overcome together. And by the grace of God, have that opportunity, right, to change the trajectory of the nation and the paradigm of self-destruction, division, conflict that we're in. And that is going to necessitate all of us. That's going to necessitate learning to dream again and be creative again, and to reach across those invisible mirage-like, demarcation lines, right? To rebuild relationships, friendships, right? We are much better when our society functions as a relational construct instead of merchandising everything and everybody into a point where everything is merely transactional. When everything is transactional, including in the psychosocial realm, everybody is a product. People are more than products, right? I don't look at people as products. I look at people as people. So that means our corporations and how they view things are also going to have to change. And I'm not talking about woke political correctness. That's political bullshit. right? That's gameplay. I'm talking about authentic, real interaction. And, I mean, companies are there to make money, right? But there's a right way and a wrong way to do things. You have better employees when they're inspired and they feel like they're playing a role, that they mean something to the company, right? Those things are important. Everybody wants to feel like they have a role to play that's important. I do. I want to make a difference, right? Everybody has different drivers, but a lot of the drivers are crossovers with everybody else. There's certain things that everybody shares. That's why I brought up the concept of everybody being a story. Everybody's life is a book being written, right? And all of us together make up a book of books, right? Now that concept comes from the Book of Life, right? The Lamb's Book of Life. It's a Christian concept. What kind of story can we write together that's better than the one that's being written right now? Huh? Because the one that's being written right now is being written in the language of fear, confusion, right? Conflict, uncertainty, lack of hope. And it's a dystopian novel. And dystopian novels, right, written in a postmodern philosophy, never end well. Think about it. The next part of the talk, I'll get into some more creative ideas, give you some examples of how I think about things, and maybe it'll spark some of your creativity, some things that you can do, right where you're at, right, to change the paradigm.